Hi, folks. For everybody joining, we're going to give it a few minutes to let everybody who is planning on join, and then we'll launch into it. All right. Quite a few people joining us. This is good. Aaron, you need to turn your camera off, please.
You want me to turn my camera off?
Yes, please. You're not on the panel. You're not on the panel.
Do we have too many unicorns on this one?
I'm gonna stop your video myself right now, there, buddy. There you go. Thank you.
I see how it is. All right.
Sorry, nobody else can talk either. So turn your speed. Turn your audio off too. There.
Fair enough.
Aaron's one of my partners. So
Yep.
he has the power to do that. I didn't realize he had that power till just now. So. All right, let's get going. Hello, everyone, and welcome to CSM Mastermind. My name is Andrew Marks, co-founder of Success Hacker and our success coaching training program. We are back for our monthly live webcast today, discussing the role active listening plays in customer success. Wherever you are around the world, listening to us live or via the recording through our subscription, we've got another great conversation with a great group of customer success practitioners. For those of you who haven't participated in one of these events before, this is a live and unscripted discussion where we dig into a single topic we think is very relevant to customer success. Regardless of the company you work for, the details of your customer-facing role, or the size of the customers you deal with, we aim to pick topics that are going to be practical and useful to you. The schedule for upcoming events can be found at successcoaching.co, along with our other learning products. We should have our complete 2020 schedule up within the next couple of weeks, so please check it out. There's a lot of thought leadership out there, along with a lot of theory about how to deliver customer success. This series allows us to focus on the practical and give you real-world advice, tips, techniques, and shared experiences from those out in the wild that are practicing customer success on a daily basis. And to do that, we invite 3 participants from the customer success community to join me for a roundtable discussion. These are people, for the most part, that have been recommended to us as being great at their craft, and ask them to share their experiences and perspectives. We will be taking questions later during the webcast, so please use the Q&A functionality found at the bottom of your screen to ask a question. I'm very excited to welcome our panel for today. I'm going to let them introduce themselves. Let's get started with Amelia. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Amelia Mani. I have been running customer success, product, and operation teams around the globe for a variety of different products, about a 75-25 mix of consumer and enterprise, from early stage startups to Fortune 50s like the Walt Disney Company. I'm really excited to be here.
Thanks, Amelia. And once again, very much appreciate kind of the last minute stand-in. Unfortunately, Jennifer Dole was unable to make it to our session last minute. We'll have her on another one. But Amelia, once again, thank you for standing in for Jennifer. Greg, you're up.
Hello, everyone. My name is Greg Drusy. I am currently the Director of Customer Success Management at Devada and have been with Oracle for 9 years previous to joining Devada. I have been a customer success manager and have had roles of the Director of Global Support as well, and have quite a bit of experience with customers and speaking to level C customers as well as project managers. So having a good understanding of across the board of how to listen and how to leverage some strategies to address some of those harder situations.
Thanks, Greg. Looking forward to hearing your input. And last but not least, Michael.
Thanks, Andrew. Name's Michael Buccellato. I'm a senior customer success manager at LeanPlum, and I've spent the entirety of my career working in client-facing roles and the past 4.5 years in enterprise SaaS. So excited to be here today to chat about active listening and how that can play a really key role in being an effective customer success manager.
Great. Thanks, everyone. So let's get to the topic for today. As a customer success practitioner, a large part of your role is listening. Without strong listening skills, you'll not gain the respect and trust of your most important business relationships. In today's climate, customers expect their needs to be met and feedback to be addressed fast. Active listening is an important skill for anyone in customer success to master. It allows you to engage with your internal and external customers on a deeper level and allow them to feel their message was heard loud and clear. It can also help you alleviate potential problems down the road. So let's talk about how you have used active listening within your role in customer success and gather some practical suggestions on how others can do the same. Who wants to get us started?
I can kick us off in terms of my approach. I think preparation is probably the single most important thing here. And this means you've outlined an agenda with your stakeholders and you understand who your audience is, who they are, what they care about, and ultimately what they're responsible for. And then you'll be able to deliver value by asking questions and having a discussion around the outcomes you guys are working towards. And when you're having these conversations, actually be able to focus on listening when you're with your customers.
Michael, you mentioned understanding your audience. Very important to understand your audience and have a list of potential attendees that are going to be either in the room with you or remotely on the phone. And it's always advisable to take a look and understand their backgrounds. Go to LinkedIn, go to some of these social sites that you have access to, go to the company's website and gain an understanding. Try to find an area that you have in common. Maybe they have some contacts. It's a lot easier to have a discussion and to establish a relationship, maintain a relationship when you have something in common with that customer as well. So it's important to understand your audience for sure.
I would also add on to that for me, a really important part of active listening is trying to understand what's underneath what's being said. Sometimes what's being said is not in its entirety. So it's, I think partly going down the path of when people are specifically asking for a new feature, for example, what would that mean for you if you had that? What would that look like? Why exactly do you want that? And I think that you'll not only earn their trust and respect that you're showing a lot of interest in what they're trying to do, but you will also have so much more insight in your ability to be able to deliver against what they're looking for will be greatly enhanced.
So that notion of listening for total meaning.
Yeah.
Right?
And, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. No, yeah. So listening for total meaning, using tools like 5 whys techniques, things like that.
You only have to go 2 whys, but yeah, I mean, that technique. But also for me, having worked in a lot of other markets outside of the US where there was a language barrier or cultural barrier, trying to really understand and repeating back what you're hearing to ensure, are we really on the same page about what it is that you're after as a customer, so that I can ensure that I'm doing the best that I can to meet that need.
And restating what you've heard also establishes with the customer that you understand and you're listening to what they're saying. And what they are saying also has value when you're restating it. You may not use the same words. You may translate a little bit so that it applies to the scenario that you could take back to your company. We want to be that customer liaison back into our respective companies, and understanding what the customer needs and translate that in a manner where everybody understands, and establishing that confidence that I'm here for you, Mr. Customer. I hear what you're saying, and I'm going to do something about it.
To that end, I would say that active listening is a very underutilized service recovery tool. I've worked in a lot of very high-end products with with clientele that had extremely high expectations, and we weren't always able to meet those. But if I can't offer a service recovery solution in the moment, sometimes it's enough for somebody to feel very heard. And I think that is, I've experienced it myself as a consumer, where it's very underutilized, where I get shut down and just told, sorry, that, we can't really do anything about that, without really feeling that I had the opportunity to fully express the experience that I had. So I think that it's a very underutilized aspect of service recovery to really engage and have somebody feel completely heard and seen.
Yeah, I think it's critical in terms of, there is no perfect solution out there. Whoever you work for, whatever vendor, there's always going to be challenges and problems, which is why the customer success role exists. And being able to effectively, actively listen, make sure your customers understand that you've heard them and you have a clear definition of what their challenges are, and be able to provide next steps and a clear path forward to help them remedy those solutions if you can.
Yeah, so summarizing what you hear doesn't just ensure that you understand what the customer is saying. It really is it tells the customer, hey, I am listening to you. And sometimes, to your point, Amelia, sometimes customers just want to know that they're being heard, that it's just not somebody on the other end of the line that's reading off some script, right? That they just don't, that person really is just, I'm just going to read this script. I really don't care what you have to say. Because I found more times than not, when somebody's calling you and they have an issue, they can complain. They just want to get it off their chest.
And not every situation we encounter is always a positive scenario. Of course, in customer success, when we're hearing from a customer, a lot of times it's because they want to escalate something to us. So it's always good to show a little bit of empathy. I understand what you're saying. I could relate to that. And that helps establish the conversation, to move that conversation forward. As you mentioned, the customer wants to know that you understand and that you could relate to them. Then we can discuss. We're all on the same page. We have a baseline of an understanding of where we are and where we need to go. Now let's discuss how we get there.
Yeah. I think by repeating and reiterating what you've heard is really going to help your case in terms of making your customer feel like you truly understand what their situation is. And it helps you position yourself and be able to ask more open-ended questions to dig into those challenges that you've heard, or whatever the specific situation is. If you're in a high-touch model where you're really trying to do discovery and find more strategic initiatives, this is an opportunity for you to build trust with customers and have them open up a bit and really understand how your solution is impacting their bottom line.
So how do you engage your customers when you're in front of them and you're in a meeting and we're having a monthly business review, or you want to talk about initiatives coming up in the next 6 or 9 months? It's interesting that everyone has their own style, right, on how they're going to interact with the customer and try to get them to open up. I typically try to stay away from the question and answer scenario. And I want to engage them in a conversation, because when we engage our customers in a conversation, they're more liable to provide information that we wouldn't have known to ask or to obtain additional information on it. So I typically engage with the customer and say, tell me a little bit about the current initiatives over the next 6 months to a year, and provide me some insight as to where the initiative is originating from. Is it coming down as a corporate initiative or a CIO initiative? And explain to me what that looks like for the organization. Maybe there's other components. And then I tend to get quiet, and I want to hear what they provide me, because that may open up the door either for other products that we have, or it may also highlight some red flags in there. Holy cow, this is what they want to accomplish. We can't do that, or we can do that. So let me follow up with that.
Amelia, you were going to say something?
I was going to, just to build on top of what Greg was just saying, I have two questions that I tend to ask in order to get a picture of the broader landscape of what's going on. One is, if it's a senior person in a senior leadership position, what keeps you up at night?
Right. Yep.
Talk to me about what's keeping you up at night, because there's always something. And the other is, that I like to ask is, if we sit down a year from now and have a beer or a cup of coffee and it was an awesome year, talk to me about what happened. Talk to me about specific things that we achieved or what the story of this past year has been. And then it really gives you a sense of what are their priorities, and where's their head at. And so that you can, to your point, either tie in with specific features or potentially other services in your portfolio. But it gives you a really clear picture, and then you can touch back with them, on those regular points along the way, and asking questions about those specific milestones. And so a lot of the time they haven't really thought about it that way. And I would say a large portion of the time people thank me for asking that question in that way, because it kind of takes away all the formal structure of either OKRs or other sort of strategic ways that you that also have their place, and just kind of let's look at it from a narrative perspective.
Yeah, no, I really like that question. 12 months from now, what are we cheersing to when you re-sign this contract? So that really opens up the floor to really understand what their top level business initiatives are without you kind of sounding robotic and digging into very kind of vendor specific type of questions.
Now, I wanted to drill in also, though, to something that you mentioned, Amelia, and I don't know what kind of experience Michael and Greg have had in international markets. But I think the active listening in the international market is particularly interesting, given that it's not just you're not just dealing with trying to understand, the root of what's happening with a customer, but you've got that language barrier, right? I remember when we used to open up international markets, and there were conversations about, we can just send somebody from the U.S. over there. It's like, no, it's not that. They do business differently. We can't just throw somebody, even if they're an English speaker, we can't just throw somebody over in Europe and expect them to be successful. We ideally need to hire someone over there, or we have to have somebody physically move over there, and kind of immerse themselves into the local population. But what's been your experience with that, Amelia, and anybody for that matter?
Yeah, markets can look very different. When I was setting up a telemarketing team that was going to be focusing on the Brazil market, we were bringing a model that we had launched in different markets in Asia and also in Europe. And then we started looking at the numbers that Brazilians love to talk, and they will talk for a lot longer than, for example, a Korean customer. So you kind of have to keep things a little bit more focused, or you're going to be there. It's not sustainable to have that many kind of conversations. So going into it, you understand, okay, so I need to have these specific strategic questions that I'm going to ask, and I need to keep this focused, or we're going to be here all day. As opposed with, for example, the Japanese market, where it's very, it's very hard to really extract what is the actual problem. You'll get a lot of roundabouts. So you kind of need to go down a path of not really asking questions necessarily to the opportunity that they're having, but be presenting solutions and see which of those are more attractive. So I think, to your point, understanding nuance of how you have conversations in those different markets is really, really valuable.
Yeah, you know, we have some Brazilian clients
I
in
saw you
particular.
smiling when I was talking.
Yeah. Yeah, and we've had very late night conversations over dinner and drinks with them that go on and on and on and on. And they're great people. We love working with them. But yeah, I've experienced that myself for sure.
I think the domestic markets also pose a very complex kind of challenge in terms of clarifying what customers mean. And I think culturally, from East Coast to Midwest to the West Coast, you know, people are definitely different, and you know, you'll see more directness on the East Coast rather than the West Coast. And
Hey, we can be direct there, New York guy.
I think that's what makes it even more important to be able to ask those clarifying questions. And I think even language-wise, you know, as you work in SaaS, people tend to use different language for different technical terms, so which makes it super important to ask those clarifying questions and make sure you really understand what the customer is saying.
I think Greg was talking earlier about doing research and trying to understand as much as you can before you go into a conversation. I think in an international context, that's also really important. So if I know that I'm talking to somebody in marketing, what are some other things that I can pull in to create more shared context? Either, you know, talking about more universally adopted products like Perdot, or, you know, what are all those other ways that I can also pull and make references that we both are familiar with, if we're not able to necessarily have all of that shared foundation between the two of us.
Yeah, I think there's also other nuances. You know, if a customer says the word but or and, you know, what to actually take at value there. So to listen to some key phrases like that as well could give you insight.
So and two things. Well, I think we've covered so far most of the steps of active listening. Two things though that I don't want to gloss over that I think is really important as you move into a conversation with somebody. One is that you want to approach every conversation with a goal to learn something, right? So you want to think of the person as somebody that's going to teach you something. Right? It's not necessarily teaching you how to do something. It teach you about their company, their role, what's happening in their business. The other thing that I think that we all suffer from, I can be very bad at this, is you need to stop talking and focus closely on the speaker and suppress that urge to think about what you're going to say to what they're going to say.
Andrew, you're right. A lot of people listen to respond rather than let the customer finish their thought and absorb what they've just said, and then respond. They may be answering your question or you're finishing your thought that you have if you let them finish their process. Right? Let them finish what they need to say, absorb it, and then respond. When we ask questions or interrupt our customers, it actually interrupts the whole discussion cycle, and we need to really refrain from doing that.
Yeah, something I've found helpful is repeating in my head what the customer is saying. This helps you focus a bit more on listening and rather than formulating a response.
So repeating in my head what you're saying and before formulating my response, Michael.
Exactly.
Actually, just a little trick that I have so that I don't do that, and you see me looking down is I take notes. Instead of sitting there and trying to come up with my next response, I want to listen, but I don't want to forget to say something. I'll just take a note. It's real simple. If you're not going to meetings with a notepad and a pen, you're not doing it right.
And that applies whether you're in front of the customer or remote. And we're on a teleconference. So we're on a phone call. We're in front of the customer. There isn't a huge advantage in being in front of the customer in that you can read that body language. And that body language will tell you as much about the customer and the situation visually as you can get listening from listening to the customer. And that's something that we need to be aware of and keep track of as well. You know, customers that do this, they're disconnected. They're not listening.
Yeah.
Or checking their watch or constantly looking at the clock. We lost that customer. And again, understanding your audience, what is that role that he's playing? If that's the decision maker and a champion for this solution, and I've lost him, I need to figure out a way to reel him back in and get him engaged. Otherwise, this trip may not be, what the discussion may not be to our advantage, right?
Greg, what are some of the ways that you re-engage when you see somebody crossing their arms or sort of, you know, leaving?
There's a couple of ways to do it that I like to leverage. If I'm in front of the customer and I'm standing, typically I like to stand when I'm in meeting with the customer. And sometimes when you see that happening, there's an old trick as a technical trainer. They tell you to walk your room and you stand next to the person or start to approach them. And it makes them realize I need to be re-engaged. Or ask a question of that person. Say, you know, we've done a lot of speaking here. John, I'm really interested in hearing your perspective on what we've just discussed.
Yeah, I typically, you know, pointing back to the preparation piece, I will write down specific questions for different stakeholders. So if there is an opportunity to re-engage someone, I'll kind of go to my notepad and ask one of the questions that I had specific towards that audience member.
I agree. Also having a list of outcomes, not just necessarily questions, but you're meeting and you're discussing with the customer. What did you want to get out of that meeting? And that will help you formulate a tactic for the meeting, for the discussion. I think that's really important. A lot of times we meet with these customers or with customers and we're on these calls. If you're being invited to meet with the customer, you should have a goal on what you want to get out of that meeting. What do you want to walk away with? And what is it that you think the customer wants to walk away with? And when you start the meeting, let's validate what it is that the customer, what we think the customer wants to walk away with. And that helps establish the agenda for the meeting to make sure that we understand why we're all here.
Yeah, I think that plays a key role in giving you the ability to be able to actively listen. You know, removing all those other variables that might come up in meeting with customers is going to be super important in terms of putting yourself in a position to be able to actively listen. And I think, you know, outlining an agenda with your customers, leveraging your champion before you meet with them, especially if it's more of a strategic type meeting, before you actually sit down with them is really going to put yourself in a position to ask intelligent questions as well as to be able to focus and listen to what they're saying.
Well, Michael, you just mentioned something also. When you're creating that agenda, you said outlining the agenda with your customers. How many times do we get into the habit of creating the agenda based on what we need and not engaging and asking the customer or sharing with them, what topics would you like to cover? What is your agenda as well? Holy cow, that's you just mentioned that. That's really big. That's an important piece.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, we get so stuck in our own ways and want to put all of our customers into one very specific bucket. But at the end of the day, the best organizations and the best customer success managers are putting their customers first. And what that means is really understanding and working with them to make sure that we're able to address, you know, what they're hoping to get out of any sort of engagement.
Which is why active listening is such a core piece of the puzzle for customer success. Right?
Yeah, we have to keep in mind what the customer says isn't necessarily what they mean. And sometimes getting them to express what they want. Take some of the emotion out of it and listen to what's actually being said. And the emotion definitely plays into it, because there may be a scenario where there's a reason why they're getting emotional. Maybe they're the ones who champion the project, and it's not going as planned. So it's understanding why we're having the meeting, and reading your audience, and understanding what's happening, being able to take all those pieces of information and process them quickly. That's something that's unique, I think, to people like the customer success management role. Amelia, I'm sure that it's very important for some of the customers that you've worked with, both in UK and the States, right?
Oh, definitely. I think I spent a lot of my career in markets where the local language was not something that I spoke. So that means that a lot of those conversations are about triangulation. So it's not just repeating back, but sometimes it's asking the same question a few different ways to sort of give edges to what we're talking about and ensure that it's the same thing. And yeah, I think the UK is kind of interesting because it's feels deceptively familiar. It looks sort of like aspects of the United States. Obviously, they speak English.
Speak English, that's a big part of it, right?
Yeah, but it might as well be, Denmark or France, because it is very, very different. And how, there are aspects of how we operate in the United States that are kind of a turnoff. And so, bringing it down a few, having it be a little bit more of a humble conversation and not necessarily coming full force on why something is awesome, which are aspects of communication aspects that in the US market, if you're not being very clear about your value proposition and why your service is awesome, that's going to count against you. Whereas in some of these other markets, that's not going to be taken on board quite as well.
So in your experience, in all of your experience, what's the best way to handle to-do lists or to take action on customer requests or issues? What's that, once you've had that listening, that conversation, what do you do with the information?
I think first, obviously, being able to confirm how this is being prioritized within the organization and what's the actual impact. By doing those clarification questions and doing the discovery, you'll be able to understand what the type of effort that's going to be required, what's the expected timeline for completion, and then knowing these details is going to help you drive accountability with your champions and your stakeholders and put together a to-do list.
You may not be able to identify the action plan, the LOE, and provide that in the meeting, especially if you're in a meeting where it's more of a strategic meeting. And it's okay to finish that meeting and say, recap, right? I've got a couple of action items I need to follow up on. And if here they are, restate the action items. Sometimes you miss one, and the customer or somebody else in the meeting will provide input and say, oh, you missed one, or let's just add a little bit more to that first one that you mentioned. And then say, okay, I'm going to get back to everybody with the action plan, and we take it from there. We don't want to walk out of the meeting and have it as, okay, we had the meeting, we're done, our hands are clean. And there are follow-ups, and it's important to maintain the progression of that meeting offline, because those meetings are expensive. We've got a lot of different people in there who are making some big decisions for their organizations. You want to be able to have that meeting, understand what you need to get in there or to get out of that meeting, and make it efficient, show the value, demonstrate the value, and maintain the progress that you've built. And that's where the additional communication or the follow-ups occur.
think it's also about understanding what would it mean to them to have these. So if we're talking about feature requests, for example, I had a client the other day who said, I would love to be able to export this data, data from this part of your product into Word. So for me, then there were a whole bunch of questions. Oh, why specifically Word? What are you going to do with this once you have it? How are you going to use it? What, is there a specific format? Which fields would you want? And as they started talking about how they would use it, it opened up this whole use case that I had never really thought of. And I was like, that is super interesting. So it enables me to go back to the product team or to, to whatever your process is for sharing that. For us, it's, we're in the process of implementing product board, but also just giving like a heads up, especially if it's something that I know that the product team is already working on. So I'll put that into the Slack channel for the product team and say, hey, this is a really interesting conversation. They've asked for this feature, and this is how it's going to fit into processes outside of our product that are really interesting, that may or may not be other areas that we were looking to go deeper into their operation with. So it's, I think that everybody benefits when you have a broader context into what that feature would enable them to do and how it would create value. It's very challenging. Having also led product teams to get that feedback, they want to be able to export into Word.
Well, yeah, understanding the use case and being able to communicate it to product is so important. You can't just go, hey, they want to do X. Okay, no, it's not just about that. It's they want to do X, and here's why.
Yeah, and this specific type of user at this organization wants to be able to do this so that X. And if they can do that, as a customer success person, then I can see we're able to then move them in the direction of this other service, or, here are these other ways that will be more deeply embedded. So when it comes time for renewal, there's more ways that we're embedded and that they would not want to see us go.
We got a few questions, and before I get to those, I got one more question for everybody here. Can you share a time when using active listing skills played a role in helping solve a critical customer issue? Anybody have anything top of mind that they remember in their past where they've used active listening? I know that might be a tough question for folks, but I figured I'd throw it out there.
I'll try to take a stab at it.
Sure.
I had a customer that I was going on site to meet with their chief architects and their CTO, because a project was failing. It was going south, and the escalation came to me from one of the chief architects at the organization. I brought, of course, my architects, and I made sure that I knew who my audience was. But it was interesting I would say the first 15 to 20 minutes where we let the customer more or less vent, because it wasn't a meeting that we were going into that, hey, hurrah. It was, why is the project failing? What can we do as an organization to understand what they're saying, and let's turn this thing around? What needs to be done? So we were going in there with our ears wide open. And it became pretty evident within the first 15 to 20 minutes that there was a lack of communication going on from their project team and working its way up the chain. And what happened is the chief architect for the organization was basing his statements on what he had heard in a water cooler discussion. And by understanding where he was coming from and speaking to our support organization and some of the project team that was there, it was quickly identified the problem wasn't with the product. It was the fact that the project plan wasn't being shared and communicated effectively internally at the organization. And understanding that, we were able to reel them back in, but more so is understand why the project plan may have been, there were a few areas that needed additional attention, but we identified training out of it. We identified additional workshops that needed to be created. And what else can we do? Well, we need to have a weekly status report that goes out. And by getting in front of the customer and listening and understanding there's a big disconnect here. How do we put everybody back? How do we put the pieces of this puzzle back together again? That was huge. That was really important.
That's a great example.
I would say nearly every time I've had an introductory or a first interaction with a new client, and I've asked them to talk about a year from now we get together and this was an awesome year for the business, what happened? I have almost always been able to identify at least 2 to 3 more value, ways that we can create value for them along that journey that weren't in the initial scope or sales conversation or what was initially laid out. It's very rare that I've not been able to, walk away with that and have a clear understanding of more, and also who are additional stakeholders or participants in the organization that we could bring in and have them understand how we create value that perhaps hadn't been initially involved.
Yeah, I think it's probably most important during the onboarding phase of the customer lifecycle to be able to exhibit active listening the most. You don't really have any rapport with the customer just yet. You don't really know the language that they use. So being able to truly understand and define what their outcomes will look like by using active listening is super important during the onboarding piece.
I think you mentioned, Amelia, you don't want to talk about OKRs and all that stuff, but understanding, to your point, what keeps you up at night, right? What is your boss's goal, right? And how do and what are your goals that lead to your boss achieving their goal? And how does what we have for you help you achieve your goals and your boss's goal? Understanding that linkage, and you don't necessarily get that from reading a statement of work or the notes from the sales team, or even sitting in on a demo call. You get that, to your point, from having that conversation with the open-ended questions and really understanding what's behind what their objectives are.
Yeah, who doesn't want to look good to their boss? If I can leverage that conversation to help understand how I can help you look good to your boss, that endears everyone.
Yeah, it's the ego card, playing the ego card. I love playing the ego card. We teach that. So let's we'll take a few questions here. So the first one, Rich, how do you bridge the gap between being the customer happiness person versus sales growth? I don't know if that's honestly, Rich, first of all, I don't believe customer success is necessarily the customer happiness person. Personally, your job is to drive value. It's not to make the customer happy necessarily. You can have an unhappy customer but they're getting value. So, if you're driving happiness, that typically means that there's sales and growth, right? If you're driving value,
right.
That typically means that you're going to see some sort of growth, right? You're going to see some continued engagement with your company, and hopefully if you're getting value and they're getting value out of you, they're going to keep buying from you, right?
Right, that's your land and expand scenario.
Yeah. All right, let's see, Kevin, at times I find that the request of an irate customer is actually not the underlying goal. I like to say I want to help you with your request, also look for other opportunities to accomplish your goal. What was the reason for your request? Do you have any other questions you use? Do you have any questions you use to identify the motivations of the customer around a high priority task?
I think probably talking about if this task is successful, then what happens? Like what happens for you? What happens for the organization? How does this move things forward, either for you, your team, your organization? Because that will also bring up more information that you can ask questions about and gain more understanding about what's driving it. Again, I mean, I think we talked a few times about not taking things at face value. A lot of the times, you know, what they're asking for isn't, you know, they're proposing a solution, and it's our job to understand what is the problem you're trying to solve, really.
And what are the negative consequences that are aligned to that if that specific initiative doesn't happen?
Right. What happens if we don't solve this problem? Right.
Mm-hmm.
So looking at it from both sides. I've got, let's see here. Question off of Greg's example from Michael. How can CSMs help customers break down communication silos? Any examples?
I think every time you meet with a customer on site, I mean, I know most of the organizations that I've worked for, you have to work with multiple teams and stakeholders at the customer end. So having the opportunity to sit in front of customers, I think always presents an opportunity to break down silos and bring everybody in the room together. So I think meeting on site as much as possible presents a pretty good opportunity to bring all the stakeholders together, because we know, especially at larger enterprise organizations, they tend to sit in silos and don't communicate, even though they're maybe a few feet away from each other.
How many times have we been in meetings with the customer where we invited maybe multiple business units, and one of the business units or one of the leaders is talking about what they did with the product that you're selling or that they're leveraging, and somebody else will say, "You guys did that? We just started to, why are we recreating the wheel? Why don't we just leverage what you guys already did?" So a lot of times in the organizations, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So having them in those meetings is really helpful.
A few years ago, I did a consulting engagement with a company that had one of these setups where it was one of those big, you know, it's a bullpen type, everybody's sitting in the same room, sharing tables and things like that. And I got them into a boardroom and we had a conversation about, we were doing customer journey mapping and customer success engagement blueprint development. And there were people talking about what they were doing, sitting next to people who they literally sat next to each other on the floor. And they're like, "I didn't know you did that. I didn't know you spoke to these people." It's amazing, right? But you get them together and you start talking. And if you can't get on site, because getting on site isn't necessarily practical, I've found, you know, Zoom is a great, this type of environment, just getting people video on, having a conversation in itself as an alternative is a great alternative as well.
Yeah, it's your job to be that agent of change and to facilitate that kind of connectiveness within their organization. I think it's a great opportunity for you to kind of bridge the gap within their organizations.
Yeah, for sure. All right, we got another one here. Nick, that's been upvoted a few times. How would you deal with a situation where you get a customer and their initiatives goals don't align with what your product offers? And or if they tell you what success looks like over the next year and you know your product can't directly impact it?
Boy, setting that expectation, understanding the expectation and managing to those expectations in that scenario becomes very difficult, right? So I think what we have to do is maybe take a phased approach on what do we have that can address what they need to do now, and what value does that have to the customer, and maybe identify that phased approach. Well, we can't do everything you're asking for now, but we can do, you know, if we can deliver X, Y, Z and get you to here, is that okay to get you moving forward and progressing with the solution, with the understanding that we'll deliver something else, you know, maybe the other pieces that they need in a specific time frame. And that's where it comes important to have product management engaged, and to leveraging your interdepartmental contacts as well in the organization.
I think it's also, so it depends on, you know, how big of a client is this? How valuable are they to you? I think part of it is going back to the team and brainstorming. Can we get creative? Like if this is a really valuable client, and let's say that something that they're asking for is something that we anticipate to have in 6 to 9 months, can we offer a manual option? Like, is that something that we would want to extend because that makes sense because given the value of that relationship. But I also think it's really important to be upfront about where there is a disconnect and you're not going to be able to meet their needs, because I think they will be appreciative of understanding of you being upfront, as opposed to wasting their time and money and waiting until they come to the realization that this product or service is not going to be able to deliver what they need that's in line with their strategy.
Well, I also think it begs the question: how do we get to that point to begin with, right? Is this is marketing focusing on the wrong ideal customer fit? Did sales oversell something? Are we selling futures? Is the person who closed this deal just doesn't understand what our product can do? And so what you also need to do, besides what you need to do with that particular customer, I think you need to be prepared to look inward and say, okay, how can we, first of all, to your point, Amelia, is this something that we think is worthy of us putting the time and effort into? Because maybe it's a market or a vertical we're interested in getting into, and then we can do that dance with the customer and say, well, we'll figure it out. But you also got to say, how did we get ourselves into this to begin with? I myself have too many experiences in my professional life where we didn't ask that question, where we didn't kind of root that out, and we just kept getting those things tossed over to us in post-sales. And it's incredibly, there's nothing that greases the skids of a churn more than when your operational executive, because I've been in these calls myself, has to get on a call, the first call with a customer, and has to reset expectations. Yeah, well, we know you were sold that, but we can't do that.
It's hard to come back from.
It is.
Yeah.
I think it's important to understand at what point in the cycle or the sales cycle or the engagement did these questions come up? Was this post-sale? Is this when they're still doing their POC with their understanding? We were told it would do this. Somebody didn't use active listening probably at the organization, or they didn't know what questions to ask to fully understand what the end result or the goal of the customer was.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Gerard, I think we answered your question about what are ways to reset a customer expectations given limitations of the product, continue to deliver value. That's going to be very specific to your product itself and what situation you're in. But I think the panel gave you threw out some suggestions. There's this thread in here in the Q&A about crossing arms. There was a question about why assume that crossed arms mean a disengaged customer. Actually, there's a large body of study around this. Just want to throw this out there, that arms crossed over the chest is typically indicates that a person is being defensive. Now, yeah, there are situations where people may cross our arms as a form of self-soothing, as Adamina pointed out, or they could be cold, but honestly, in most cases, in the vast amount of cases that at least I've seen in business, crossed arms in a meeting means that somebody is either disengaged or defensive.
Yeah, and I was just using that as an example, that the majority of the times when you see that behavior, that's how it's interpreted.
It is, and we're not. And once again, we're not just coming up with this. I would encourage you all to go. Just Google body language, and you'll see there's lots of studies around this, around body language. Let's see, Ross. We have spent a lot of time talking about listening to customers. Have you ever had to build this up within your team, company culture, and how did you go about doing that?
I think doing, sitting down once a week with even your teammates and doing some role playing is a great opportunity. I mean, we have only so many chances when we're speaking with actual customers. You need to take time outside of that and, work on how you're speaking and how you're presenting, and being able to actively listen, I think, poses an opportunity for you to sit down with your teammates and do some mock scenarios.
And one of the exercises that I'll be delivering next week we're doing a 2-day workshop here in the Bay Area is about active listening. And so it's all about, getting people just to think about how to be better active listeners, because it's such an important topic. Loretta, do you have any tips or programs on how to improve active listening other than taking notes? This is definitely an area I would like to improve.
I find if it's like a Zoom call like this, I always ask permission to record. So I'm not trying to, be in the conversation and take notes. So that really frees me up. So I'm not trying to do too many things at one time. And I find that very, very helpful.
That is a technique that I use all the time when I'm having conversations with whether they're prospects, back when we did a lot of recruiting, when I was doing recruiting work for folks, recording the conversation and then transcribing it afterwards so that I got those notes. Or when we're doing consulting, and we do a lot of remote consulting, so I'll get on the phone with customers and have these conversations so we can have that and you can practice active listening. It's a great suggestion. Anybody else?
The script is really good as a transcription app.
Yes. We've used rev.com, which is live transcribers. And we also have discovered a product called Temi, which is actually based in San Francisco, that is an AI transcription. So both two good products that we use. Any other suggestions, tips?
I mentioned before, repeating what the customer says in your head while they're chatting, being able to exhibit good eye contact, nodding your head. These are ways that you're showing the customer that you're listening.
Great. The one last open question that has been asked that I haven't mentioned, honestly, because it's not really relevant to acting necessarily, but I want to give it some airtime. How many accounts should a CSM typically manage? It depends, Nick. It really depends on a lot of different things. It depends on what your product is, what markets you serve, who your end users are, how complicated it is, what the ARR. There's so many different variables that go into this. I had somebody reach out to me a few years ago to ask me for what that number was, and I said, I can't answer that question because there's so many variables. And she didn't like that response and went with somebody else's response. But there is no one answer to that question. And Temi is TEMI. TEMI dot what is it? Temi is TEMI.com in San Francisco. Susan.
No, I totally agree. It also depends on the service that you're a CSM for. How nascent is it? How developed is it? Because if you're still figuring out your space and your service, then you're not going to be able to take on as many clients.
And also understanding how complex is the environment. Are there multiple integration points? Where is the customer in regards to the implementation? Typically, we're much more involved and much more engaged in the implementation phase of a project than we are after the deployment and usability, where you're more in a run and maintain scenario. So understanding where your customers are in that journey, implementation, you may only be able to handle, a handful.
Another factor is, who are your customers that you're supporting? Are they C-level executives? Because they're going to have a different set of expectations in terms of availability and the level of communication that they're going to receive.
Absolutely. Again, knowing your audience, right? Who are the end users, and how is the deployment being phased, or who's using it and how are they using it? It's all good. There's so many different factors.
Somewhere between 12 and 100.
Right, exactly, or even less, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I've seen 5 be the right number too.
Yeah, five $1 million accounts could be as much work as or even more work than $50,000, $100,000 accounts, right? So it really depends. Let's see, Crystal. Once again on the fringes here, but Our customer success team is very small, and so I spend a huge portion of my time on just helping newly onboarded customers with concerns. However, I feel that other customers should be reached out to as well, since many of our churned accounts are due to lack of contact. Any suggestions?
I like to set up a standing call, depending on how long they've been with us, but at least once a quarter, if not twice a quarter, to check in and talk about new things that are coming up in the product and understand how are things going on their side as well.
Now, would you do like a live webinar like this though for a large group? Because sometimes that doesn't scale well.
Yeah, if I can cluster them by either industry or interest, so either all marketing executives or all in a specific space, definitely. But going through and having that opportunity to showcase things. Sometimes it's also if it's at the tail end of development and about to come out, showing that, or there's something that's changed in the market and wanting to talk about that. Yeah. How can I create value for them?
Right.
It's important that the CSM is proactive, right? Being reactive, that's more how support functions. As a CSM, you need to be proactive, contact those customers in advance. Who's coming up for renewal in the next 6 months, 9 months? How are you ensuring that they're getting value and that they want to renew? So I think it's going to be different for each organization, but you have to make the attempt. You have to keep track of who and how am I going to contact these people.
Sometimes it's also looking at what is something that's tangential and of value. So for example, when I was working for Disney, we had an education product. So we had other people coming in from the education space and doing thematic talks that we knew would be not directly related to the product, but of interest to our customers. So any ways that we can bring them back in and be top of mind and connect with them. And if it isn't that there is something related to your product that you can talk about, what are some other ways that you can leverage your own personal network or your professional network and have those people come in and create value on your behalf?
Yeah, exactly. Kind of like what we're doing today.
And engaging with your product management and having them do a webinar where you could invite multiple people. Hey, here's the feature set. This is what we're working towards. You get a lot of takeaways from there, but that's engaging your customer again, trying to be proactive.
For sure. And then whoever's from Definitive Healthcare, real quick, have you leveraged specific decks to help drive the conversation so that you can just listen rather than having to ask questions? That to me, no, you need to ask questions. If you have, I mean, from my perspective, you're going to have to ask questions. You're going to have to ask questions and then you listen, right? I don't see any way around that.
And ideally avoid the yes, no questions.
You should, yeah, definitely. Everything's got to be open-ended, right? Always got to have that those open-ended questions. Things Amelia, you rattled a few off. You said, what are the strategic initiatives? How do you see this being used, right? Avoid closed-ended questions that can be answered with just a yes and a no, for sure. That's actually a key step in active listening. And then the one last one, and then we're going to cut it off because we're already 2 minutes over. And once again, appreciate you guys sticking around. On a yearly basis, how often would you suggest formal touch points with customer accounts? To me, my immediate answer to this one is always it depends.
Yeah. I think how my framework and what I've seen be successful is bi-weekly. Typically one call will be more of a tactical how-to type of session, and then we'll reserve the other call to be more strategic, where we can focus on outcomes and high-level initiatives within their organization and be able to exhibit that active listening and perform discovery with customers.
What does your customer need, right? What does your customer need and what do they want too, is the other question you got to answer.
I will say I agree with all of those points, and I would say also at least 2 times a year that are separate from a conversation around selling them something.
Yes.
That's like the bare minimum, is that you have 2 conversations throughout the year that are completely unrelated to, renewals or anything like that.
Because you know what? At the end of the day, you're still going to be trying to sell them something. You're selling them on the value, right? This is I'm here to help you achieve your goal. I'm here to help you sleep at night. I'm here to help you achieve the goals that roll up to your boss's goals. I'm not selling you something, but I am. Because what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get you to get as much value as possible about what I have to offer. And that to me is going to translate to you continuing to do business with us, or you expanding your business with us. Because if you're getting value from what we have to offer, then why are you going to go anywhere else?
It's kind of like the difference between helping someone buy versus selling to them.
Yes.
Mhm.
Excellent. Thank you, all of you, for joining me for this conversation today. It was a great conversation. Thank you to all the people who attended online. Great set of questions. I hope you all have an amazing holiday season. We will be back in January for our next CSM Mastermind. Check out the schedule and the other things that we have to offer for you at successcoaching.co, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Andrew.
Thanks. Bye-bye.